Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles County Fall League Day. In this segment, we will learn about the LA County Election Administration Plan for 2026 to 2030 and how we as informed voters can help refine this plan. The plan is submitted by is under the jurisdiction of our election department, which is at the Registrar-Recorder County Clerk. We're very familiar with it. It's our go-to site, lavote.gov, where you can find just about anything you want to know about elections and volunteering to be a poll worker and the VSAP process through which we developed our unique and very capable vote recording devices. And we have with us this morning our representative from the Registrar Recorder's office, Kathay Feng, who is the Senior Deputy for Policy and Program Compliance. So that's how the Election Administration Plan falls within her purview. Kathay is the former Executive Director of California Common Cause, and I have known her since the late 90s, working on elections through the Registrar Recorder's office. So it's a delight to have her making a presentation to our league audience today. In addition, during her stint at Common Cause, she was the chief architect of the California Voters First Act, which the league collaborated in. Which created the California Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is a model for redistricting across the country. It drew the boundaries for our congressional districts as a result of a ballot measure in 2010 that have defined our congressional districts in the last two districting decades. And if this measure passes, it will set aside the redistricting commission for the next few years. Kathay has spent a year in Ohio trying to get a citizens redistricting commission passed in the state of Ohio also. She has championed and won campaign finance reforms, has advocated for stronger net neutrality rules and voting rights for disenfranchised communities. Many league members have worked with her at the Registrar Recorder's community voter outreach group for the last 30 years and are aware of the work she has done with election protection, which monitors polling places in California to ensure compliance with state law with regard to language assistance, being open on time, being polite and helpful to all voters, to enforcing the no electioneering laws, and to help with accessibility at all of our vote centers and polling places. She will be helping us understand the election administration plan and seek our input. And as we did in the previous segment, please submit your questions through the Q&A function, and Fatima will be offering them to Kathay after her presentation. So welcome, Kathay.
Good morning. Welcome, League. Hello to all of you all who are staying through the second session of a very long day already on a rainy Saturday morning. Thanks for joining.
Really?
Should I get started?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
I think we already have recording in progress, so we will be able to post what you have to say.
Excellent. Let me work on getting this share screen on. And hopefully this is what you see. Okay. So everybody, I am so excited to be talking about today's topic of the election administration plan. This is the plan for the upcoming elections, not this year, the special, which came out of the blue, and I will not comment on, but offline, if anybody wants to have a lively conversation about that, I'm happy to. But about the 2026 and 2028 elections. So, in order to understand what that plan is, it's useful to think about where we are in Los Angeles County, right? This is the largest, the most complex, the most diverse voting jurisdiction in the nation. We have 5.7 million registered voters, and we are spread out across this gigantic space, right? 4,100 square miles. And we serve voters not only in English, but in 18 languages as required by law. And that is the most number of languages of any county. I'm going to be talking about the election administration plan. And so I'm going to pause on this slide for just a second. You can either type in lavote.gov/EAP, which stands for Election Administration Plan, or you can scan this QR code. And that brings you to our website that's got the EAP. You can download it. It's a little bit long, but the main thing actually is that in addition to the things that I'm going to be talking about today, you'll see that we've got a list of the potential vote centers and the potential drop boxes. And we're already starting to get some feedback from folks saying, hey, this is a great location, or this is not a great location. Could you please rethink? So please do scan this QR code. On that page, you'll also find dates for upcoming hearings, and we really would beg you to let other folks know. We're going to be out in a lot of different places. We talked a little bit in a previous session about the Magic Johnson site. We're going to be there. We'll be in Pomona, East LA. On Monday, we'll be in Long Beach. And so we're really looking forward to trying to get the word out. It's been a little bit challenging because with the calling of a special election, I think a lot of our resources got diverted to really thinking about how to pull that thing together. But if you go to this website, you'll also have an opportunity to submit comments. So they can be small, big. You can say, I love this thing. You could say, I want more pictures and please make it bigger font. Whatever you want to. We would encourage you to give us comments. Okay, hopefully by now you have either jotted that website down or you've scanned the QR code. I'm going to keep going. So what is our plan to ensure that every voter has an opportunity to vote? We are really thinking about four different prongs, right? We're thinking about how we educate voters about their voting rights and options. How do we promote inclusive participation and really think about target audiences that need particular designed programs, right? Voters that have language needs or disability access needs. Um, and then third, how do we distribute, locate, and maintain our vote centers and ballot box drop boxes? Those are distributed throughout the county. And in this plan, we talk about both the methodology of choosing those locations, but also we lay out the potential locations that we're looking at already. Right. And then also we lay out what our staffing plans, what is the equipment like, and what would the potential layout of any vote center generally look like? So again, we're looking for feedback. Please let us know. And then lastly, we are implementing a security and contingency plan. This is something that we've always done. We have had security plans thinking about cyber attacks, thinking about natural disasters, but of course now we also have to think about the potential for election violence, and the potential for, other kinds of things where people are just deciding that they want to cause disruption. So as we evolve to try to be as responsive as possible, we also need to hear from you to tell us, right? Here are things that I'm seeing in my community, my neighborhood, in the people that I work with, and here's what we're hearing. And we try to be responsive as quickly as possible. Okay, so in order to really reach out to this many voters, one of the things that we engage in is mass media outreach, right? So we think about, in the traditional sense, that broadcast and ethnic media, thinking about newspapers, newsletters, and we're also, of course, doing direct mail to all people who are registered voters. But we're also using the newer forms like digital and streaming media. We're on Instagram, we're on, TikTok, we're on LinkedIn, which who knew that was going to come back and be a thing. And then we do a lot of email marketing. So we talk directly to voters whenever we can. And then lastly, we think about how people move through this county. So thinking about billboards for people who are drivers, people who take the bus. We're thinking about bus shelters and transit wraps, right? But bus wraps and bus posters. So just really thinking about how people move through the county and reaching them. Margo already mentioned our website, lavote.gov, which you all are very familiar with. I'm sure you've got bookmarks there already, but you can visit that for updates about, what are we doing with regard to voter registration? What are the new technologies? But also on election day and the days afterwards, what is the vote count? And can I see what the updated numbers are? We are using the lavote.gov as a way of kind of reaching out to people. Now, that's also a really great way to reach us if you're trying to figure out how can I help a neighbor to request a ballot in another language. This week, for instance, we're just about to mail out CDs of audio ballots for those people who have sight impairment. They will request those CDs in order to be able to listen to the audio ballot read to them. And we can do that in multiple languages as well. So there are a lot of different ways that people can request services through lavote.gov. We're thinking particularly not just about broad outreach, but also the best way to make sure that we go deep is to collaborate with community partners. And so here we have three different partnerships: the Community Voter Outreach Committee, the Voter Access Advisory Committee, and the Language Access Advisory Committee. So those three. The CVOC is the one that's been around for the longest, and it kind of has everybody under the sun who's interested in elections and voter outreach generally, including League of Women Voters. And then we have these two specialized ones, one that focuses on language, one that focuses on disability access, where people really dig down deep, and we'll talk a little bit about some of their projects. We would invite anybody in League, not just Margo, to join us for any of those meetings if you've got an interest in those particular things. These are open, and you can email us, and we'll give Margo the information offline if you're interested in joining any of those, and we can just put you on the list. So when you're available, you can join. Now, here's the good news. I don't know, good news, bad news. It used to be that we met in person, and we would meet in person either in Norwalk or we would meet in sometimes in LA City's facility. But ever since COVID, we've gone just about all online. Other than as we get close to a big election, we might have an in-person meeting or we might have events that are in person. It makes it, I think, much easier for people to participate if you've got the time. So let's talk about disability access. One of the things that our VAC, our Voter Accessibility Advisory Committee, put together with us was thinking about a training video, right? And making sure that we were meeting voters where they're at. So not only sort of creating all of these good technologies and, making sure that people have access, but also training our election workers to think about what different people's needs might be and how you go about being responsive to those requests. And so that training video was created with VAC. It's now shown to our election workers every time we bring in new batches of people. Another thing that we collaborated with our VAC on was very recently we went to a potential election vote center, right? This is at the Gene Autry Museum. And as our team was measuring and surveying the site to see whether or not there were disability access issues, what's the slope? How much space is there between different spaces that are designated for disability parking? When you walk inside, are there impediments like things that are sticking out, protrusions for somebody who is sight impaired that they might walk into? Are there cracks in the ground? So if you're walking with a walker or you're you are using some other kind of tool that you might stumble over, right? So they're really thinking about all of those aspects. And you can see how once you get to it, it's difficult to find locations that are 100% accessible. So the move we can do is measure, find best locations, and then create a lot of things to mediate the situation. And so this is our VAC team, our many organizations and leaders who work with people with disabilities, coming with us on that survey of the Gene Autry Museum and learning about all the little details of the things that we do. Okay, so what do we do when it comes to disability access? Well, two of the big things is at every one of our vote centers, we have curbside voting. And that curbside voting allows people to, if they want to, they can pull up to the sign that's outside of the location of the vote center. And they could be in a car, but they could also, come via other means, transit, walking, and they can talk to the election worker and request a ballot or hand them the ballot, right? And our election workers are trained to kind of meet voters where they're at. So whatever the request is, they're kind of accommodating that. And we now have election workers who are designated to be at that curbside voting sign on a rotating basis, but they're constantly there. The other thing is that we have this ballot marking device, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's that gorgeous California golden poppy yellow. I just love that color. But that device that people can, if they're voting in person, can vote on, right? You see this individual who is using the audio ballot feature. So he's got the headphones on. He's listening to the instructions and the ballot and what's on it read to him. And of course, that can be sped up or slowed down. It can be turned louder, whatever whatever the need is. Some other features of that ballot marking device, and we're actually going through some upgrades right now. So I could talk a little bit about that if people are super interested in geeking out. But it has adjustable height. The screen itself is adjustable. So you see somebody who is sitting in a wheelchair, the entire system can be lowered to allow for the wheelchair height, and then the screen can be popped up. There's also a controller pad to the left. So if your manual dexterity is a challenge and using that touchscreen is a problem, you can also use the controller pad, right? And then lastly, we have all of our 18 languages plus English loaded onto every single BMD, ballot marking device. So people can see their ballot in the language that they need from the very beginning. Now, what I think is really interesting is that we have in Los Angeles about 120,000 plus ballot styles in the primary elections. That means depending on where you're living, you're going to see a particular combination of candidates, measures, local issues on your ballot that will be different from somebody who lives in a different precinct, right? And so we load every single one of those 120,000 plus ballot styles in 18 languages with the audio for all of those languages and English on every single ballot marking device. That's a lot of content, and that's only possible because we designed this ballot marking device in Los Angeles to suit Los Angeles voters. This is the one and only publicly owned and publicly designed ballot marking device in the entire country. We owned it, we designed it, and we designed it with a lot of feedback from folks like the League of Women Voters committee that participated with us. Okay. So we provide assistance in 18 languages, and this is required by both state and federal law. These are just some of the materials that we put out there. And when we say that we provide assistance in these 18 languages, what we do is we actually translate our sample ballot booklets, our voter instructions, of course, right? But also our outreach materials, everything that you interact with when you go into a vote center, like the directional signs, the signs that indicate what an election worker is speaking. We think about it from beginning to end to try to make sure that if your first language is not English, or you are a limited English speaker, that you have the ability to kind of be guided in seeing words that are in your language, so that ultimately when you come in to vote, you have the ability to feel not only that you can cast the ballot, but included in that whole process. Now, we also provide bilingual oral assistance, so that can include bilingual election workers who are sitting at those vote centers, also multilingual hotlines people can call, and as I mentioned before, the audio ballots that can be mailed to people that are translated, or if you go into in person to a vote center, you can hear it on the ballot marking device. Our team is constantly going out to places in Los Angeles County based on invitation or based on our inviting ourselves to educate people about voting. And so you see, we are spread out, to universities, to the county fair, to naturalization ceremonies. I think the top right corner is a picture of us out at a naturalization ceremony, and that's one of the busiest places that we can be. But we're really kind of wherever people invite us to. So we'll bring out all the materials, including if somebody asks it, we'll bring out um, a ballot marking device for people to kind of just see and touch and experience. But we're also bringing out voter registration forms and lots of fun little tchotchkes. What are the different ways to vote? So because we have become a Voters' Choice Act county, we have provided people with multiple different ways to vote. And I'm sure League of Women Voters, you all know this, but um, we now mail to every single voter a vote by mail ballot, right? And that is a new thing, because it used to be not more than 5 years ago, you had to request that vote by mail ballot, right? And so as a result, a lot of people voted in person, right? But we now mail everybody a vote by mail ballot. And that means that you can return that ballot any number of ways. You can return it by mail, you can return it in a drop box, or you can drop it off at a vote center. We call that many ways, many days, right? The other big piece about the new Voters' Choice Act is that you can vote in person at a vote center. And the thing about a vote center that's different from a polling place is a polling place is tied to a precinct, which means you are told that you will vote at the place that is designated that is closest to you. There's a lot more polling places, but that means that you can only vote in that location, because that's exactly where your ballot is. You could vote at other places, but you won't see the ballot choices that are associated with where you live. When you vote in a vote center method, you can go to any one of the vote centers. So we'll talk a little bit about the vote centers that we're opening up, but you can also go to a mobile voting center or a flex voting location, and they have all of the ballot styles. So let's say you live in San Dimas, you work in Santa Monica. That's an ungodly drive, by the way, so I'm sorry if that is true for you. And then you stop somewhere along the way for dinner in San Gabriel. You could vote at any one of those three locations, right, based on your convenience. And so that's really, I think, the thing that is kind of the most innovative thing about the vote center model, or the voters' choice model that allows for vote centers. And then lastly, I just want to mention remote accessible vote by mail. So for people who have a disability or in other ways cannot get to their ballot, they can actually go online, pull up their ballot, mark it, and then print it out, and then they can return it, in those traditional ways by mail or by Dropbox. And to some extent, this is really useful for people who are homebound and or for instance, there was a year when Sandy hit the East Coast, and a lot of our firefighters and emergency first responders went out to the East Coast to help them. And then they suddenly realized, oh my gosh, wait a second, how do we vote? Because we don't have, we didn't designate for the vote by mail ballot to arrive. And so had remote accessible vote by mail been available at that time, that would have been an option for them. Okay. This is just some of the ways that in the last election, people voted, and you can see the trend lines. It used to be this was flipped. About 75% or so of our voters in Los Angeles County like to vote in person, and now it's flipped. About 28% of people vote in person. 72%, now this is a little bit, I'm going to break this down a little bit. They use the vote by mail ballot. Okay. And then of that, 51% drop it off at a Dropbox. 17% go to a vote center. So this is interesting. They still like the in-person part. So they go to a vote center to drop off their vote by mail ballot. But they like the quickness of being able to drop it off. I think a lot of people go to vote centers also because there's an assurance that it feels like I'm handing it to somebody who is working on the election, which means I don't need to worry about it arriving on time or not arriving on time. And then lastly, 32% vote by dropping their ballots off in the mail. I'll just mention that drop boxes, ever since last year, we are now checking those ballot drop boxes every day, particularly in the 10 days leading up to Election Day and on Election Day. Those are getting daily pickups. And that means that we are just making sure that we're prepping them, as soon as we get them, but also from the voter's perspective, that your ballot has been picked up on a daily basis. So you can be assured that it'll be counted. So when we think about vote center placement, there are a number of different factors that we look at, and I won't read these all out loud. There are 14 criteria that we think about when placing a vote center. And obviously, this is just the where, but then which ones, like which buildings we can actually choose. There's a lot of other factors, like does it have enough electricity? Does it have a size and space that's large enough to allow for a lot of voters to come in and out with some spaciousness? And the spaciousness is partly because, we grew out of that COVID period, but also because for a person who is coming in with some kind of assistance, that could be a wheelchair or a walker or another human being who's helping them, right? They need some space to be able to vote. And so we look for larger locations when possible. Now, you're going to see all of these details in the election administration plan if you download it or if you just want to look at it online. We will be opening 10 days prior to Election Day, 120 vote centers. And then 3 days prior to Election Day and including Election Day, we add another 520 vote centers, which means for a total of 640 that are open on the 3 days prior to and including Election Day. Just for point of reference, for this special election, and this is because special elections have different rules and partly because it was called so late in the game, we will have 250 vote centers. So just note, it's not as many as normal. It will be fewer, but we do have those 10 days. And so we do encourage people, take your time. If you want to come in a little bit earlier, that's one way of avoiding the big crush of people. Ballot drop boxes. So we have 420 that are spread out throughout the county. And again, the list of those ballot drop boxes is in the plan. 29 days before and continuing through Election Day, those drop boxes are open. And then at 8 p.m., we actually have individuals who are stationed at every single drop box. So on Election Day at 8 p.m., we close them down, right? And then we take all of the ballots from there. So that means that people can vote in a 24-hour way, right? For that 29 days leading up to Election Day. And that makes it very convenient because I know a lot of people are already starting to get their sample ballots. And very soon, you'll also be able to get your actual ballot, your ballot that has been mailed to you if you're a registered voter. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity measures. As we look forward to this upcoming, the 2026-2028 elections, one of the things that we just want to reassure everybody is that every single one of our ballot marking devices and our tally machines, right, are air gapped. That means they are not connected physically or wirelessly to any network or any internet. I've actually seen these machines, and they have wires coming out of them, but those are to electricity, not to a wired connectivity. So when people are worried about the potential for an outside entity that might, uh, hack a voting machine or hack our tally systems, they can't do it, from some remote location. It just isn't possible. And in order to make sure that they can't do it when they're standing there, we also have other things like encrypted connections and centralized operations that are constantly monitoring the network connections just to make sure that there's nothing fishy going on. security measures in other ways. So, as I said before, we think a lot about the potential for disruption, and that can be everything from a power outage to natural disaster to some kind of disruption, somebody bringing a weapon to the vote center. We have a number of different protocols that are in place. One of the most important ones is we do train our election workers to be prepared, and if something happens, we have a telephone. We've equipped them with a specialized cell phone that they can call and immediately call as well 911. So we're making sure that everybody has connectivity to a centralized command center. And if that happens, we'll deploy people to try to resolve the situation. If a vote center gets closed down, and I'm just going to give as an example, that could be for power outage reasons, or another reason is you all may remember in 2024 in Georgia, there was a series of bomb threats that were called into polling places around Atlanta. And during that time, police were called in to do a bomb sweep, right? And that takes time. And you can't have human beings in there. So you had to ask everybody to leave the building, which meant that the entire building was on lockdown for 3, 4 hours during the voting day. Well, in Los Angeles, the good news is that we have the ability to have a pop-up vote center um, close by, and we also have the ability to quickly notify voters who are in the area of alternative options, right? So they can go to the pop-up vote center, they can go to any number of other vote centers, or just drop their ballot off in the drop box, right? And we'll actually give those instructions that way. We also have some equipment that is just prepared for situations like a power outage. So we have backup mobile generators and other kinds of power systems. I'm just going to mention this because Margo has asked it a couple times and I know it may be of interest. So we have recovery measures for people who were displaced, either from fires or from some, any other situation, right? If you are displaced, we want to let you know that you can go to our website and so go to lavote.gov recovery, and that's the QR code right there in the lower left corner. And the answer about whether you need to re-register to vote or simply change your mailing address will depend on what you consider to be your primary address, right? Where is your home? If your home is a place that has been burned down and you are temporarily displaced to a location, but you hope to go back there because you're rebuilding, right? Then your registration address, your home address, should be the place that you consider to be where you want to be registered as home. And then you can change your mailing address. And that means that your ballot will reflect where your home address is, but it will be mailed to you where you're currently living. It's a very useful thing to know because I think for a lot of our voters, they've been concerned. I consider Altadena or Pacific Palisades to be my home. I know that I'm going to be going back there, but it might take some time, a few months, a few years, right? Depending on what the situation is. And so during that displaced time, you just change your mailing address. If you've got any other questions, this lavote.gov/recovery website actually has a lot of kind of prompts and answers. And we actually have translated a lot of materials into multiple languages just to help people out. And by the way, if you did not know this, anybody who was displaced because of the fires, if you need any of your records replaced, so the other side of the Registrar-Recorder County Clerk is that we provide a lot of materials, right? Your birth certificates, your death certificates, your marriage certificates, but also your property information. So those are documents that can be the beginning of rebuilding for a lot of people. In fact, actually, they couldn't move forward without those documents because it's the first question that organizations like FEMA will ask for. So we will provide that for free for anybody who lives in the zip codes that were affected by the fires. Okay. You have sat through a community hearing, and thank you for that. We are going to be having these hearings through October 31st, and then we go dark for a period of time, partly for the special elections, but also because we're going to be taking all that information that people have given to us, and we want to incorporate that into an updated election administration plan. Right now, it's a draft, right? And then we'll have one final public hearing on December 4th. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so here are some of the public hearings that are coming up. And again, I would just ask if League of Women Voters, if you can get the word out, or if you want to visit us and maybe you feel sorry for us and you want to come back out on to the Long Beach City College hearing and make sure that we don't have an empty room, we'd appreciate it. And especially if you want to tell neighbors and other people who rely on League of Women Voters for information, please do help us get the word out. This is the list of consultation workshops that multiple organizations have helped us to organize, and League of Women Voters, you're right smack in the middle, and thank you for doing that. And then this is the EAP public hearing, and that's going to be at the Ballot Processing Center in the City of Industry. And my invitation to League is, by the way, that's where at the end of Election Day, lots of 18-wheeler trucks and cars and vans come with all of the ballots to the ballot processing center. And that's actually where we count all the ballots. So it's an exciting night if you want to join us, on election night or the days afterwards, because we're processing all the ballots, and every single one of them, there's dogs who come and sniff the ballots to make sure that there's nothing dangerous inside. And we will host people. If you give us a call beforehand, we'll make sure that you've got credentials and you can come watch the process, right? And if you come for the public hearing and you want to take a tour at that time, just let us know. We'll set up an opportunity for League of Women Voters to come and visit the ballot processing center just before the public hearing. If that's the incentive to get you out, we'll do it. Okay. This is the QR code again for anybody who wants to just visit the site to download that plan or see the calendar or find out how they can give us feedback. Just go to this site. And that is all, and I'll be open to questions.
Well, thank you, Kathy, so much. This is so informative. And I intend to set up a tour of the ballot processing center on the November the 5th.
Okay.
For people to come and see it. The tours I brought last year, all the participants were thrilled to see everything. Okay. And the first day is amazing.
Yeah.
With all those ballots coming in.
I will say that we have this sort of like this railing that goes around this gigantic, almost like a big open factory floor. And the railing allows people to kind of see a lot of different corners of that big room. And for some people, they actually stay there all night because they're with candidate campaigns and whatnot. And so what I'll say is, like, if you want to stay with us a little longer, you could also bring a little folding chair or whatever. I'm just saying, like, if you could take the tour and walk through, but you can also stay there with us as we work. I mean, on some elections, they are there, all the way through the midnight hours because we have to count 24/7 in order to be able to process in the big years. So in the even years when there's a presidential election, on election day alone, we will get 1.5 million ballots coming in. So by the way, all those people who are crankety about, like, why don't you get those ballots counted? It's because we have so many voters, and that's a good thing, right? But it also means it's because there's so many voters. So 1.5 million ballots is a lot.
That's true. Thank you. And Fatima is going to address the questions that have come in so far. So I will turn it over to Fatima.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions. I know we're supposed to end at a certain time, but I think in the interest of all these questions, we should probably just continue on. If people have to drop off, that's okay. I will mention I loved my tour. I really loved my tour. It was so exciting. I went there with Margo and Caroline Delamas, our secretary on the board, and it was just a very exciting time. So I definitely recommend it. But let's get started with the questions. The EAP mentions 14 criteria for selecting vote center sites. Can you share which factors carry the most weight, such as proximity to public transit, population density, or past turnout, and whether placement data will be made public for review.
Okay, so if you're asking, okay, sorry, let me just go back to the 14 criteria. I think I just zoomed past it, didn't I? Here we go. So the data that we do make available is actually the locations. And that's actually what that public review is happening right now. I think some of the other things, it's a little bit, it is variable depending on the location. So let me give you an example. When we're talking about the northwest portion of the county, right? Vehicle ownership is actually per capita relatively high. And that's partly because people live farther apart from each other. And so driving is not as much of an issue to get to a location. By comparison, when you're living in much denser places, and I'll just pick on Koreatown or Pico Rivera, right? Those are places where a lot more people live
Union.
in Pico Union, sorry. They'll live in apartment buildings, right? And they're more likely to use public transit. So some of the criteria kind of depend on where we're looking at, right? Low vehicle ownership, limited English speaking, low income communities, right? Thinking about population centers, that might apply to more dense urban areas, right? And then other places we're thinking about distance from the polling place from a car perspective, right? And that might be less about actual distance and more about, is it close to major roads that allow for people to get there or major transit for people to get there. And so just as an example, again, when we think about like a location, the transit issue is a big one. We're thinking about whether or not they're on a bus line or other kind of transit line for people to get to, even when they are on a major road. So last piece, I'll just say proximity to employment centers and high propensity registered voters. So what'll happen is in denser areas or where there are a lot of people who are voting, or sometimes it's where there's a lot of long lines. We might say, okay, we're going to have a location or a couple locations in this place, but we're also going to just we're going to look for larger spaces. In urban dense areas, sometimes those large spaces are just not available, right? So that means that we have to sort of pepper it in many different places. And this is sometimes very challenging, particularly what I've seen is the balance between finding locations that are accessible, that are large enough to kind of allow for more people to have flow in, but at the same time, that you can even find a space that accommodates that in some of our lower income and dense urban areas is tough. Like sometimes there just is not a community room that is that big, right? And so that what I'll say is that it's not an easy kind of one thing is always more important than the other, because what ends up happening is that we're looking at different geographies that have different kinds of challenges. So one place that, on a university campus as an example, we know that a lot of people are first-time voters and they are using conditional voter registration because, young voters are saying, it's election day, I'm going to come in and vote, right? And then good news is that they can register using the conditional voter registration option. The downside is it takes longer and there are longer lines. And so a combination of kind of doing outreach to encourage people to register and vote earlier, but also knowing that there are going to be long lines, and sometimes those lines are like 4 hours long, right? We might then accommodate that by having a pop-up voting center that expands the number of voting machines or put more check-in. And literally, we just talked about that today. It's like identifying something like 156 locations where we just have more of the e-poll pads to check people in, because that's sometimes is the thing that slows people down. So we are constantly adjusting based on the data that comes in. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Margo, did you have any comments on that before I move on to the next question?
I think that was a very good explanation, and if people have suggestions for large Wi-Fi accessible and voter accessible locations, they can certainly turn those suggestions in to the registrar's office.
Yes. Go to that website. That is exactly like that is actually, we had people telling us, hey, you were looking at this location in Claremont. It's lousy because it's not accessible and it's, it's too small, but we would like to suggest this other place. And every time that somebody tells us this someplace is lousy, we encourage you to give us a couple of options, right? Wherever you think of, because that makes our life a whole lot easier to be able to scout out alternatives. We don't want to close a place down until we know that we're not leaving a community totally in the lurch.
Okay. What logistical and staffing models support that scale? Perhaps that's the slide where you were talking about how many people voted, especially in the last 3 days. And how will the county ensure that each site is adequately resourced without compromising voter wait times or accessibility?
It's a couple different questions kind of wrapped in there. So, how do we get our folks? One of the things that the county has innovated recently is we've always recruited people from the public, right?
Mhm.
And we've also always recruited, we have a whole class of voters, so community vote election workers and also student election workers. But increasingly, we've also expanded the universe to county employees. And the nice thing
Yeah.
about that is that county employees can be deployed from another department, right? And they'll volunteer. They were already paid by the county anyways. And so that allows us to kind of scale up really quickly. A lot of county employees also are multilingual, and part of their job is to assist people. So they're kind of familiar with a lot of systems that we use. So that's one thing that we've innovated. We also just put out the word. And so people put their names on lists to become one of our election assistance people. And when they're on that list, they'll go through a full training and they'll be on reserve. And sometimes we expand it very quickly when needed. Okay, so second question was, how do we make sure that as we get closer to election day and there's more and more people, we try to bring the lines down? So two things. One is, as I mentioned today, just this week, we were talking about certain locations that we know just from history, they have surges closer to election day, that we're going to deploy more e-poll pads to those locations because oftentimes the slowdown is not at the ballot marking time, it's when they're first checking in because they have to look up the name, and if they're not registered, then they have to go to the side and register a conditional vote. So if we add more e-poll pads, it allows for a quicker check-in. Now, particularly for the special election, because there's only one thing on the ballot, people are going to be marking that ballot and then disappearing, right? So we want to give more space and more locations for the e-poll pads. And I'll just mention one other thing. Margaret, you mentioned that we're looking for locations that have Wi-Fi capacity, and that is absolutely true. I'm going to say this just so people hear it. The Wi-Fi is for the e-poll pads when people check in to make sure that you haven't voted in multiple places or multiple times. It is not to connect any of those ballot marking devices. And then the other thing that we do is we sometimes when we see the lines are long and there's now this whole big IT system that has a dashboard that's live, right? If something's happening
Mm.
and there are long lines, we will deploy a pop-up site. So that means like a trailer or a truck will go out with a bunch of these ballot marking devices to places where there are long lines and just try to ease ease the lines a little bit. It's not perfect. It's a gigantic county. But we try to be as responsive as possible.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I
Okay.
know that Fatima's polling place in particular is one that's extremely busy.
Ooh, where's that?
And
I'm in Los Feliz.
Okay, well, Fatima, I hope that you use that EAP comment card and just tell us, like, this is really busy, and could you please, designate it as one of the locations that has more e-poll pads?
Wonderful. Okay, the next question. Give me just a second. There's quite a few to go through here.
Mhm.
Um, let's see here. Can you walk us through the chain of custody process for ballots from drop boxes and vote centers, and whether any of that data, such as audit results, is shared publicly after each election?
Ooh, good question. I will say, let me tell you what I know. I have been working for LA County for approximately 6 months. So this is partly what I know, partly what I knew from Common Cause, but I'm going to acknowledge that there are constantly new processes that are being developed that I will not explain fully, and am happy to kind of work with you all to kind of get the full answer. Okay, so chain of custody. So from a Dropbox, there's always two people who go to pick it up. And so what I said before, they do this interesting thing where they go out always in pairs. And two people are always responsible for two drop boxes. And what will happen on election night, as an example, is the driver will drop off the worker at one location, and then the driver will go to another location for a drop box. At 8 p.m., watches synced, they lock it, and then the driver will go back to the first person. They'll both be there as they're emptying it out together. And then they drive to the second location and they empty that out together. And each time they empty out a drop box, they're put into sealed boxes. So there's actually a seal, they sign it. When it comes to our ballot processing center, it gets unloaded from trucks, and there's a whole process where they're constantly scanning to say, okay, so this just got picked up from what location. They kind of know the path. It's a little bit like, now when you get a package from
Yeah, tracking.
Amazon. I don't want to say that, but anyways, but yeah, from a location you could track you're tracking your package. Okay, so even when ballots have run through the tally system. So they've been processed. Sorry, there's multiple steps. So from there, it goes to if it's a vote by mail ballot versus the ballots that are coming from the vote centers, they're in envelopes, right? And so the first thing that's happening is there's a machine that is verifying the signatures, and it's kind of separating it out, and it's this beautiful gigantic machine, and I took some pictures the other day. It separates it out into, okay, these signatures all match, these ones we've got some extra questions with, these ones have some extra writing or whatever. Okay, so from there, and
Okay, let's see.
the ones that are signature cleared, it goes to the tally room. The ones that need extra handling, it goes through a human process called extraction, and all of this is on a gigantic, kind of like a factory floor that people can observe, and we have cameras on. So there's no, I guess, to the extent that everything is very, very transparent, that is part of our guard against any kind of malfeasance, right? And the people who are on the floor with the ballots that need some extra handling, they are extracting it by hand. They're verifying, like, hey, are there coffee stains or weird things, that make it hard for the machine to be able to read? They're also if it needs to be remade because coffee stains, right? Dog bit it, somehow somebody ran it through the washing machine before they returned it to us, right? Then that ballot will actually go and get remade onto clean ballots so that it can actually be read by the machine. And those processes always have kind of double blinds, right? So when there's remaking, it's not one person doing it. There's actually, I think, a team of 3 who sit and make sure that things are accurate, right? And then finally, when it goes to the tally system, there are people, there's always sort of multiple people who are handling different batches. So they work as a team to make sure that, I've loaded it. Great. You see it on your system. And then as soon as they are run through the machine, they're put into a box, and we generate like another scanned, kind of like a barcode, right? That allows us to seal that box of ballots that have been counted. And it has a unique information about where it's going to be stored. And we hold on to those ballots for, I think it's
22 months.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for confirming. 22 months. And because of that label, we actually know it's on the, shelf number 62, third row down or whatever. So there's a lot of ability to kind of track batches of ballots. Now, by that time, when it's already been put into that box, it's been separated from its envelope. So we do hold on to the outer envelope, but we don't know who that ballot is associated with, right? So for audits, the ability for us to do that 1% audit then relies on having access to those batches of boxes, right? And I'm now stretching this a little bit beyond what I know, but because we have all of those boxes nicely organized and sort of, it is possible for us to kind of pull batches out and do audits using those and then return them. And you know exactly kind of where they came from and at what point did they go through the machine. Now, we are right now going through testing where we're running through ballots using sort of sample created ballots where we have gone and mucked up, right? Like uh, written things down that are not correct or written two names down or marked it multiple times, right? And all of those are parts of what we do right now as we're doing testing. I watched them and they had one that was torn and they were like testing the machine to make sure, if it is at all out of place, they should be getting that same number. And then they're looking to also make sure we know that it should tally up this way. Is it tallying up this way? And during those practice runs, right, and those are all created by us. One of the reasons why we decided to create our own ballot marking device and also be able to hold on to the create modular machines. We didn't create some of these machines. We just use modular machines like scanners and whatnot. It was very important for us to not have software that was used that was proprietary. And the reason why is a lot of these companies, they'll be like, well, we'd love to share that with you, but that's our secret sauce, right? And of course, that's how they make their money. But that would mean that we didn't have the ability to kind of peer into it. So one of the things that we do as we do all of these adjustments is we can actually see the code behind it, make the changes, and make sure that as we're testing, we're allowing for some of those innovations that come along that say, hey, we could make this faster if we adjusted it this way. And we don't have to go through proprietary negotiations with a company that owns a scanning machine.
Okay, Kathay, you talked about ballots from drop boxes, but with the 11-day vote centers,
yes,
those paper ballots that actually are stored on the machine in a locked box, eventually those boxes get full. How are those boxes dealt with?
Okay, so those are put into, again, we send out to every vote center boxes that can be where the ballots are put into those boxes. They are again sealed and signed. So we know that if anybody tried to tamper with them, they would, the evidence would be there. I will say that I'm not sure if the system has been updated, so I'm going to just profess ignorance. Back in the day when we had polling places, at the end of the day, you would do a reconciliation and you would make sure that I believe that X number of people voted on the ballot machines and then X number of people turned in, a vote by mail ballot. And we would actually go through the roster and make sure that the numbers added up. I believe that reconciliation happens at the end of the night and you do try to figure out, okay, so before I put the ballots into that box, I'm counting. And then I write on the outside, okay, this box has whatever, 62 ballots, right? Okay. So by the end of the night, I should have a bunch of boxes that add up to the same number of people who signed in in the roster saying that they were going to use the ballot marking device to mark their ballots. And I know that, 14 people spoiled their ballots and they had to revote again. So, oh, look, yes, in this envelope that's marked spoiled ballots that we put those spoiled ballots into, does the number match up with what we recorded? Yes, it does. Now, we'll acknowledge human error sometimes is such that at the end of the night, you try to count everything and it's like, darn it, we're off by one. And so what will happen is once it gets to the headquarters, we do another round of checking. So those ballots that come back, by the way, they're just, they get unloaded. It's like almost like if you saw one of those movies about a bank heist, like, and they just kind of keep unloading and loading bags and bags and bags. That's what it feels like. It just is an unending uh, number of boxes that are coming off these gigantic trucks
My
with all the
apologies if
ballots.
I missed this part of the question, but in regards to the audit results, the end of the question we had here, is it shared publicly after each election?
I think so, but I'm going to acknowledge, I'm going to pause and not answer that because I don't know. Um, so Margo, jump in if you know. I can't imagine that we don't either make them public upon request or make them available. So I will look into the question of whether audit results are shared publicly. Like, I
Great,
don't know if
thank
we
you.
just post them on the website, but I
Yeah,
do know that they would be available to the public.
Okay, let's move on to the
let's move
next
on.
question. The plan includes a countywide outreach campaign in 18 languages. How will you measure whether those campaigns are effective, maybe by tracking first-time voters or reduced use of provisional ballots?
Yeah, actually, what's interesting is um, we've been talking to some researchers, and admittedly, this all would have been what we were focused on this fall, except for, again, a special election got called. You don't hear any resentment in my voice. But we were talking to some researchers to be able to look at, for the people who we mail to, so we mail out like a, it's called a postcard, but it's a gigantic mailing. It's not your
Hmm.
normal kind of postcard. And on the back of it, it gives you the ability to request ballot materials in language. Okay. And so what we were going to do was to see if people who request ballot materials in another language, to track it all the way through, whether we're seeing upticks in voter participation along the way, right? And over time, and so we know that, like in 2020, when we did this postcard for the first time, we got 80,000 people requesting in language materials, right? And so are there other ways that we can do that? And so I think the thought was, besides the things that we mail, could we also look at other kinds of things that we do in terms of outreach to see if that results in increased voter turnout? Now, the reason why we have to work with researchers is, with the registrar's office, it cannot be seen that we put our thumb on the scale for anything. So while we do a lot of outreach, the question of whether that results in voter turnout, you know, could be viewed by some people as like, oh, well, you're just focused on some people. So it's why we want to make sure that the data that comes out is reliable, but also something that is associated with university researcher, as opposed to coming just from our organization, right? So what I'll say is that that conversation is ongoing, and we might have to pick that up when we have a breath, possibly in December.
There's been some interesting and well done research by Mindy Romero at USC.
Yes.
And she does webinars post election with the results that usually looking not only at LA County, but the whole state,
Yeah.
as to trends in voting and that type of thing. So it's a very worthwhile, what's it? I can't remember what her acronym stands for right now.
Yes.
But it's Mindy Romero at USC.
Yes.
I can send it out later.
Yeah, she's fantastic, and she is one of the researchers that we were talking with.
Okay, great. When you conduct accessibility surveys or receive reports from voters with disabilities, what is the timeline and mechanism for correcting site level deficiencies, even on election day? And how will you report how often fixes were required and implemented?
So it all depends on when that report comes in. I'll just say, the closer we get to election day, the more our staff are consumed with the running of election day. That said, so what I learned from Jamie Young, and she is this person who is in this picture, she's look at this doorway. In the doorway, she's standing on the tape measure. That's Jamie Young. Okay, she's the person who's kind of in charge of the team that does all the surveys. And one of the things that they do, so let's say they say, okay, Gene Autry gets, I'm making this up, they don't actually have this language, but like an 80% grade. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And we saw that there were cracks in the sidewalk and you know, there's some protrusions along the way, but the good news is that they have railing in the, you know, in the slight incline area. It's got some bumpy tiles, some broken tiles. So what they do as they go along is they actually bring a whole lot of, they're not just measuring, but they'll put out the mediation measures. So for instance, they bring a whole lot of cones, for instance, bright orange cones, and they'll put them in places where that crack is or where there's a broken tile or some you know, obstruction. They'll take a picture of it. Okay. Then they create a whole package, and it goes into what Jamie calls a big red envelope. And she says it's the only red envelope that election workers get in their whole box, right, of materials. And every day they ask the election workers to take a picture of where they put their cones and their signs and their mediation so that it matches the pictures that the survey team told them to do. So she is in touch with the election workers every day. She gets the set of pictures and then she says thumbs up or no, move the cone this way. So it is possible. I'm not saying I can't say for sure, but what I will say is because there's that regular communication, it is possible that if we get input from someone saying, hey, this wasn't here 3 days ago, but it was raining and the, you know, it started to leak and it's created a I don't know, you know, loose tile situation, right? It is possible that if the election worker isn't already alerted to it, that a voter who says that, then the message gets to Jamie's team and they do a revised thing. They send the team out to kind of look at the situation and they remediate it. I will say I'm using the rainy day example because actually she was telling us a real life situation where they had scouted a school gymnasium or it was their auditorium, and it was perfect, you know, in the summer. And then come November, when our rains happened, because rains don't happen that often, the rain started seeping in through the roof, and so much so that things were falling from the ceiling and also, you know, dropping onto the ballot marking devices. So they very quickly worked with the school to find an alternative, you know, location, which I think was out in a trailer. And they also had to make sure that, you know, they created new signage to get to that location, you know, because people didn't necessarily know it as well, and make sure that there weren't obstructions. So they do make on-site changes, even during the 11-day period. And if it's significant enough, you know, they will do a whole new designation and say, okay, this location is off limits. We're going to just change it to something else.
Okay, I'll scoot
But
through
the
a few
purpose of
more.
the EAP is if you see some of these problems and
Find
you
it.
know about them beforehand, boy, it's so much better if we just, you know, remove it from the list because it's just not appropriate.
Great, thank you. This is a hypothetical question, so I suppose answer to the best of your ability. In a scenario where federal actors challenge or attempt to restrict mail-in voting, how would LA County protect voter access and what legal or operational contingencies are in place to preserve the integrity of the vote by mail program?
First of all, the Constitution places the ability to determine time, place, and manner of elections in the state and by extension the counties, and only when Congress speaks, Congress. This is not something that the president has the power to do. Okay, so we have actually sort of thought through some of the scenarios. Ballots are going out on time,
Next week.
and it's a machine that happens. So the only way to interrupt that would be, I think, they'd have to commandeer, like send National Guard out and basically forcibly shut down of the printing presses, I suppose, or disallow.
Mailing to-
Yeah, I guess that. So again, I'm just hypothetically, spitballing. They could prevent the USPS from delivering the
Mhm.
ballots.
And it takes the full week to deliver our ballots because it takes the
Yeah.
volume of 6 million ballots is just overwhelming, even
Yeah.
to the LA
Yeah.
postal center.
What I would say is, if it came to the place where there were National Guard deployed to stop the actual mailing of ballots, or the USPS just refused to carry the ballots, which I'm not even, I think we're approaching apocalypse level disaster there. Um, we do have multiple alternative ways of being able to give people access. So we'd have to think that through. Obviously the vote centers is one option. The other option is, we've got the remote accessible voting. I don't know that the system is designed for everybody to be able to download. We'd have to talk that through. The other piece of it, though, is in terms of litigation, right? So, as I said before, the Constitution places that power squarely in the hands of states to determine the time, place, and manner of elections. And so, if we needed to, and we already have been part of lawsuits to defend the right of people to cast ballots. We were part of the lawsuit that challenged Executive Order 14248. And we laid out in great detail in our affidavit all of the reasons why the things that were being proposed, whether that was removing, vote by mail, disallowing vote by mail, or disallowing QR codes or other things, we challenged each one of those things and provided very concrete both cost to people, but cost of voting.
Okay. And I guess we'll just keep on going with that. If federal or state administrations request voter data, how does LA County
Which
determine
they
what
have.
information? How does LA County determine what information is legally disclosable and what must remain protected to safeguard voter privacy?
So in assuming this job, I've sort of become the person who it doesn't fit into anybody else's bucket, and then it falls into my bucket. So um, that responsibility fell to me. So we have actually been requested information of voters. Our own state laws, and in kind of integration with the National Voter Registration Act, we determined in consultation with our county council, but also in consultation with a lot of other experts and people at the state level, right? We would be responsive, but we would not provide social security numbers, driver's license numbers, the language that people have requested their ballots in, and race ethnicity. That's because state law actually protects those four things very specifically. And I'm happy to talk to people offline, but we spent a lot of time examining state law to make sure that we were abiding by it and we're sticking with it.
And the state
Okay.
is suing, the state is being sued by the federal government,
Yes.
but we have Bonta and Weber and who are going to stand up very strongly for us.
Yeah. I'll just tell you one little story though. So the state said, you all are welcome to come and examine the voter registration records, but you need to come here in person and use this particular designated computer because we know that it's secure and the data won't be corrupted.
Yeah.
And that's actually not unlike what we oftentimes
Yeah.
tell people who are coming to research, for something. Come to the county, look at it. So they did. They actually did not 100% say you can't get access to the data. They said you can, but you got to come to this designated computer. And they did not take them up on that offer. So.
Next
Okay.
question. there still remains a persistent voting rate gap in some parts of the county. Are there any specific plans on the county side to deal with that? In other words, or for example, changes in vote center distribution? And then I think we have one more question after that, and then we'll end this.
Yeah. So what I would say is if people want to use the comment portal to just send us any of those reports, that is a useful thing for us to look at. Obviously, we're not, I think what we still have to follow the 14 points, and sometimes the issue isn't about where a vote center is. It may have more to do with kind of the additional outreach that's necessary, and that outreach may be with our staff, but it also might be in collaboration with trusted community organizations, right? So I'll just say, depending on what we're looking at and what the report shows, I think there might be a number of different strategies.
Okay, I will combine two questions because we're running a little low on time. There was a request to get pictures of voting machines or processing steps for different newsletters so they can send it out to their local leagues. Many people ask us at the security of ballot drop boxes, and local papers post pictures over boxes that are misleading. Where can they find that? And then some local leagues are sending postcards encouraging voters with poor voting records to vote. Is there a way to evaluate whether voters who receive those postcards are actually voted? And thank you, Deborah and Kathy.
Yeah.
I think that, so give me a second to figure that piece out. That the last one is a little bit complicated. But I do think that actually we have a team, our media and comms team actually also responds to requests like this. And so not to throw anybody under the bus, but Mike Sanchez, so M Sanchez, SANCHEZ at rrcc.lacounty.gov. And if that went too quickly, get a hold of Margo. Margo will get the information and we'll pass it on.
Exactly.
But we do actually respond to questions like that. So pictures and stuff like that. I will say sometimes for my own for my own presentations, I'm just finding them off the website. And downloading them from the internet, because we got a lot of pictures of our voting machines. Because as we were developing the VSAP system, or this ballot marking device, we took a lot of pictures along the way. If that's not sufficient and you're looking for something very, very specific, between Hilda and me, so again, we'll give the emails to Margo. My email is KFENG, so F is in France, ENG, N is in Nancy, G, at rrcc.lacounty.gov. Sometimes it's a matter of just doing a really good scrub of the internet, and sometimes we can go in and take a picture if you're trying to figure something very specific out. Like, could you take a picture of somebody holding the audio, and or using the keypad or whatever that is? So we're happy to do that. I recently, as we were doing the tour of the BPC, during a practice run, like they did a run of a lot of the machines, I was taking pictures of each step of the way as people passed ballots from one to another, and then they put them into boxes and labeled them, and then they signed them and sealed them. I was taking pictures of people doing those steps, because I think it's important for people to know, like, there are steps along the way where we really try to manage that chain of custody, and we make it very visible for people to see.
Okay. The other thing I'd like to add is that I think I saw a notice that the toolbox is out.
Oh, good.
Which is full of posters, flyers in all the 18 languages that you can put on social media sites. I'm assuming if you can download it, you can put it into a voter. I've used them on my personal website and our Facebook page, and on my league Facebook page. They represent people from every walk of life. They represent every language that we offer. There's a video on how to vote using the voting machine on the website. There's a super video of Gabe. And and his family. And he was so thrilled to be able to show his family that he had helped develop this new voting machine that he and other people with disabilities could use. And I mean, I practically got tears in my eyes watching that video of Gabe Taylor, since I have met him and talked to him and have, seen him put his scooter in the back of his own car and then drive away.
Yes. So if you just Google, or I'll give you the address. So toolkit.lavote.gov, you will get all of those things, and it includes Instagram posts, Facebook posts, social graphics, right? The materials like videos that you want, newsletter graphics. So we have a little box that's specifically called newsletter graphics, and you can download a lot of those things. And we've got all of the updated days, like what's the key dates that you need to know, like when do things start to open. We also have other kinds of materials, and I'm looking at it right now. So I'll say that one more time. It's toolkit.lavote.gov. And in there's a bunch of choices. One of them is newsletter graphics. And if there's something there that you really want to look for, but you're not finding the thing that you're looking for, please, like I said, just email us, and we'll communicate with the media team and see what we can get to you.
Did you have a moment to process the question about postcards and those with poor voting records to vote? Or shall I repeat it?
Yeah, could you repeat it?
Some local leagues send postcards encouraging voters with poor voting records to vote. Is there a way to evaluate whether the voters who received those postcards actually voted?
Okay, so what I will say, so there was a different time when I wore the Common Cause hat, and we would always work with researchers who they would look at the voter list. So when you are working with a voter database, which is accessible to vendors like PDI or campaigns, or you can request it if you're doing research, right? There is actually information about who turned out to vote, right? So this is a little bit tedious, but essentially what you're doing is you are comparing, we sent these postcards to these people, and this is who turned out to vote. And there are researchers like Mindy Romero, like Thad Kauser. That's what they do. They'll even do things where they send two different kinds of postcards out, right? And they'll say which one is, does it make a difference if there's a big county seal, or if there's, a trusted organization that's sending it, to measure what the response rate is. So what I'd say is, we do have a whole department that provides that kind of data. You have to be doing it for research purposes, so you have to fill out a form and all that. And I believe you can find that on our LAvote.gov website. And if you need a little bit of additional help navigating it, I did mention Mike Sanchez. His team is the one that sort of helps people navigate that process of requesting that information. Or if you're close to Norwalk, you just like to visit, come by, visit, and you can put that information, that request in person, and sit there. As I said, they'll give you access to it if you don't want to pay for all of the data, because it is, it's a lot of data. So, but people can get access to very specific data for research purposes.
Wonderful. So before I give you the opportunity to give last thoughts, just to everybody else, we're putting together a survey to provide information to Kathay on some of your concerns, your thoughts, your comments, your advisements. We're hoping to have this on our YouTube page in 3 to 5 days, and we'll send you a link to that survey as well. So Margo and Kathay, do you have any last thoughts on this before we move on?
Well, I'd like to thank Kathay so much for sharing this very informative presentation with our league members, and encourage people to send their suggestions in and to follow up on any questions you have or recommendations you have by contacting Kathay or Michael Sanchez, depending on what the topic is. And I hope that everyone has gotten a lot out of this presentation. I mean, this is the second time I've heard it, and I'm getting more out of it.
You guys are asking, League asks league level questions. So I will say I learn a lot when you all ask me questions too. So